How to Ride South America by MotoDreamer. I'm gonna give you guys a little introduction on the topic. So today, Mike Thomsen is gonna be talking to us about how to ride motorcycles in South America. Mike is the rider-in-chief at MotoDreamer. He's 48-year young Danish citizen. He's married to Diana Puerto, who's also a co-founder at MotoDreamer, previously Motolombia. Together, they have 3 daughters, Sophie, Lala, and Danny. And Mike has visited over 116 countries with his bike. He has over 1 million kilometers ridden, and he actually has over 15 years of experience as a professional guide. And in South America, he has done more than 500,000 kilometers through all of South America, from top to bottom. He has actually completed 2 Spain-Dakar rallies, and he lived for over 15 years in Colombia. So he knows what he's talking about when he's going to give you the information about South America. Right now, he's back in Denmark, and from Denmark, he's going to be sharing all of his cool information with us. So I welcome Mike. Now he will take control of the meeting. And just remember, if you have questions at any given moment, you can just raise your hand below, clicking below on the little hand, or type your questions on the dialog box, and I'll activate your mics. So welcome, Mike, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you so much, Danielle, and welcome to everybody here at the webinar or presentation about riding in South America. I'm super excited that so many of you have clicked in on a holy Sunday afternoon. So thank you very much, everybody. This should be hopefully some fun. And like Danielle said, please raise your hand or ask a question anytime if you want me to elaborate a little bit on any of the things that I say. We will be trying to cover most of the things that we know people are usually interested in when it comes to riding in South America. This is our very first attempt of doing an event like this online, so there might be a few technical glitches here and there or some flow problems with my speech, so please bear with us and stay on till the end. Yeah, I think first of all, I'll do just a small presentation about our company, MotoDreamer, and hopefully you will get to learn a lot more, and by the end of the presentation, then I will open for a question and question and answer process or session, so you can all have the questions at the end as well if something didn't get covered. So let's get started, and let's start with the beginning. And the beginning basically was I left Denmark in 2007, and I did a huge trip in South America. I flew my motorcycle into Chile, and from there I explored the southern parts of South America before starting heading north. And actually I made it so far north that I came to Oregon, then I crossed the states down to Key West, and ended my trip there. So it was a trip that took 8 months. I passed through 12 countries, 15 states. I had 6 crashes, used 3 sets of tires. I got 2 speeding tickets. I was robbed twice. I was arrested once, and I had a drink spiked and got drugged once as well. And during that trip, I actually ended up in Colombia at the end of the trip. Let's see here. Within 5 days of arriving in Colombia, I actually met a sweet girl in Cali, Colombia, and we are now married and have 3 children. So yeah, I quickly realized coming back to Colombia after ending my trip in Miami that if I wanted to survive and live an okay life in Miami, in Cali, then I would have to work with tourism. So Diana and me started a hostel for backpackers down in Colombia as our very first business. And I would get asked all the time where could people rent a bike. I always had my motorcycle outside in front, and people would ask me, how do I rent a bike here in Colombia? This is an amazing country to ride bikes. So I told Diana we should get a couple of bikes, and then I can do small trips in the weekends and make a little extra income with the business. Since the very second I entered into Colombia, I really thought that this was one of the best riding destinations in the world. And having traveled all over the world before, this is a pretty big thing. And Colombia really is an interesting destination. It's a very specific way the country is set up that makes it such an incredible destination to ride. You can see on this map here how Colombia is in the very northern part of the South American continent. To the west, it's connected with Panama through the Darien Gap, and to the east, you have Venezuela and Brazil, and to the southern border, you have Ecuador and Peru. Colombia is inhabited by 50 million people, and the huge part of those 50 million live in the three major cities, which is Bogota, the capital, Medellin, and Cali. So as you can see here on the map. Keep going here. I just made this map so you can get an idea of the size of Colombia alone. And if you move this overlaid map of Colombia out to the west coast, actually Colombia would touch the Canadian border and the Mexican border at the same time. So that might give you a little bit of an idea of how big Colombia really is from north to south. It's really, really big. And then, of course, it's the first country where the conquistadors from Spain landed. And that means it has a 500-year-old history there. Lots of culture, lots of historic sites. So it's quite incredible. And out of those 50 million people that live in Colombia, every 5 of them have a motorcycle. So there are 10 million motorcycles registered in Colombia, which means you will see small bikes absolutely everywhere you go. This is a topographic map of the country. And if you see the highlighted areas of the map, at the very south is the Ecuadorian border, where the mountains converge into one mountain range. And that's basically the Andes Mountains that run all the way to the southern parts of the continent. But going north from the Ecuadorian border into Colombia, you will see 3 ranges of the Andes. And Colombia is the only country in South America that actually has 3 ranges of the Andes Mountains, which means you're constantly going up and down from low valleys to high mountain peaks when you're zigzagging across the country. So this is amazing for motorcycle riders who like to be in the curves and see the mountain scenery. In between the high mountain ranges, you have 2 major valleys. One is the Cauca Valley to the west, and the Magdalena Valley in the center of the country. Both these 2 rivers end into a river delta before they run into the Caribbean Ocean up by a city called Barranquilla. To your east, you will see a huge green area, which is 2/3 of the country, which is the Amazon and the Amazon Basin. And it's really very hard to get around in there. There are no infrastructure, so everything is small Cessna planes. It's sailing around on canoes and small boats and river boats. You can also see at the very bottom, there's a lot of rivers feeding into the Amazon from the high snowy mountains. And Colombia is a huge contributor to the Amazon River that runs all the way across the continent. So it's actually water from Colombia and from Ecuador, Peru, that ends up making the Amazon River going all the way to the Pacific coast. Colombia also has a couple of major deserts, one in the very top of the country called the Tatacoa Desert, and another one further south, which is the sorry, the Guajira Desert in the north and the Tatacoa Desert in the middle of the country. So when I came to Colombia, the tourist ministry there had a slogan called "The only risk is wanting to stay," and it obviously is playing off the stigma that is associated with Colombia in many cases and many places. And yeah, I became a victim of that slogan, and I ended up staying 15 years in Colombia before now having moved back to Europe. But when I first came there, I really thought that this would be an amazing country to start a motorcycle business. And I explored the country from east to south, north to west, and fought for a long time to create a business down there. We actually started the business right away. And yeah, I rode all over the country, exploring and researching for the business. And within a couple of years, the reputation from the campaigning that Colombia was doing with their ministry helped out, and people started having a big interest in coming to Colombia. We did a lot of promotion ourselves, and eventually we had a real business, and the business was Motolombia, and it just started growing from there. So since 2010, it really was our main business, and we could eventually sell the little hostel that we had built. So quickly after starting the tour business in Colombia, I obviously wanted to expand and do more, and we pretty fast started to do small expeditions down through the continent into Ecuador and Peru, mainly in the beginning, and expanded later on with the circumnavigating the Trans-Amazonian basin and going north to south and exploring all these countries that you see on the list here. So we quickly became pretty knowledgeable in South America and all of the continent there. So I just have a couple of fun facts about the South American continent here that I think are fun to look at. I don't know why this thing is not playing the way I want. South America has 12 sovereign states, but if you count on this map that I have here on your screen, then you would actually see 13 countries, but it's because there is a territory which is actually an overseas territory of France, and it's part of the European Union, the EU. It's called French Guiana. It's a tiny little country on the East Coast, and it's where the European Space Agency have their spaceport. They send up all the European satellites and rockets from little French Guiana over there. The population on the whole continent of South America is about 440 million people, now numbers from 2023, of which half of them live in Brazil. And if you consider going from the very north of the continent in Colombia, Cartagena in Colombia, to Ushuaia at the bottom of the continent in Tierra del Fuego, the end of the world, and you do the fastest road you can do, it will be around 10,000 kilometers or 6,200 miles to make the ride. We are planning the top to bottom tour, like we call it, or expedition, in January 2025. And we are known for not always taking the direct route. We like to be out of the most scenic, most interesting routes and seeing cool stuff along the way. So our trip will be around 13.5 to 14,000 kilometers. So there's some added loops in the route here and there. There are 448 languages spoken in South America, and the top two languages are obviously, or maybe not obviously, but at least it's the two conquistadors, the Spanish and the Portuguese, that came in 500 years ago and conquered the continent. So those are the two most spoken languages, but the third most spoken language is actually Quechua, which is spoken a lot all over South America. The Amazon is an exciting place, and this is also one of the places where we do our big expeditions. And if you wonder how far it is from Lima on the west coast to the Pacific, Belim on the other side. The Trans-Amazonian Highway is a piece of road that is about 5,000 kilometers long from coast to coast. So that's a pretty exciting route to ride to get into the deep jungle of the Amazon. And finally, like I also said before, about every 1 in 5 has a motorcycle in South America. So there are a lot of motorcycles of all kinds of brands, all kinds of sizes. We're talking about 80-some million bikes registered around South America. All right, so in the decade that followed me arriving in Colombia, we built one of the biggest tour and rental operations in Latin America, and we ended up with a dedicated team of 17 employees, specially modified facility and vehicles and workshop, and we had a fleet of over 50 adventure-ready bikes, fully equipped. We were receiving between 500 and 600 riders every year from up to 25 different nations around the world, and we operated between 20 and 25 tours in Colombia and down through the continent every year. And then suddenly, boom. And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, were affected by this worldwide pandemic. And us being an inbound tourist business, relying 100% on foreign tourists coming into the country, we were particularly hard hit. It started out, obviously, like everywhere else, with just a small scare, a small lockdown. It's only going to be 15 days. Then it was extended to a month, then 2 months, and so on. And unfortunately, by the 3rd month of having all our overheads and all our expenses all the same, but no business coming in, we had to start let go of our staff. And by the end of 2020, we had let go of almost all our staff except for 2, and we had to start selling our inventory and bikes. And eventually, during 2021, we also had to sell our facility in Cali. So it was a very tough time for everybody. But the good thing about chaos and conflict sometimes is the fact that you get to rethink how things are, and you get to evaluate your decisions. And we ended up actually using the time on accelerating a process that we actually had started some years before. We had started adding some international destinations to expand our tour program, and also as a plan B in case the political situation in Colombia would change, which is something that happens a lot outside or in Latin America. So we were kind of having all our eggs in one bag, and we had realized that a couple of years earlier. So we were in the process of trying to become a global tour company and not just focus on Colombia. And as you can see from our original name, MotoDreamer, we were a destination-specific company. But during 2020 and 21, we continued the process of rebranding ourselves, and we are now called MotoDreamer, as you know us. And that rebranding was finished by the end of 2020, and this has been the brand that we've been promoting ever since. And we now consider the world as our playground, and this is our new slogan, the world is our playground. We actually now do tours in a bunch of countries outside of South America as well. These are some of the countries on the list you can see that we cover on our tours, and on our international tours outside of South America. And yeah, they are obviously available for anybody who's interested in riding. Most of them are around 10 days, 10, 12 days long. On top of that, we do a lot of private groups. A lot of people we've seen specifically after the pandemic have grouped together with friends and people they like to hang out with, and they book private tours and go out once a year, twice a year on these international adventures. So we do quite a few international tours around the world. So this leads me to just a quick thing before I end my presentation about our little company. I just wanted to show you our redesigned website, where you can find all the information about our tours. And if you don't know the website, should see here, there we go. Just gonna find it here. There we go. Okay, so I just want to give you a little quick instruction on how the website works, in case you want to ever go there and have a look at our tours. If you're just on the front page of our website, when you first log in, you can scroll down a little bit, and then you can see an overview of the tours that we do around the world. Obviously, we have from Colombia, Oman, Bolivia, Cuba. All the tours are here. And then we also have a calendar view where you can see the upcoming tours that are about to happen. You have also quick access up here in the menu to go in and see all the countries, and you can choose a category, for example, Latin America, and you can see all the tours that we do in Latin America currently. And for an example, I'll take the top to bottom expedition that we're planning in 2025 in January. This is a big expedition from the very top to the very north of the continent. You can register here on the website if you ever want to get a spot on that tour. You can see the dates for the upcoming tours, the highlights. If you scroll down, you will get the difficulties of the tour, the highlights, the day-by-day itinerary. Scroll through here. You can get to see what's included, what's not included, the preliminary route that we're planning, the bikes that are available to rent during the trip. And finally, we have a couple of in-depth articles down here about the expedition, and also some in-depth information about South America in general. So this is a great resource. We have, I can tell you up here, what's called the article blog. This is a lot of information that we have gathered and written ourselves about the destinations that we go to, country profiles, tour profiles, and so on. There's a whole bunch. I think there's 60 some very interesting articles there if you're interested in reading about different destinations and tours. And finally, of course, we have the tour calendar, where you always can go in and have a look at what tours are available next. We usually have tours planned out at least 1 year in advance. As you can see here, we come already into 25, and we have 3 spots on the Trans-Amazon on the top to bottom tour, and we are hoping to also be able to run the Trans-Amazonian expedition in 2025. We are not sure if it will be possible to run those 2 expeditions in the same year. It's a huge undertaking to plan out these tours and make sure that all the little details are in place. So the Trans-Amazonian might be moved to 26, but for now, we're keeping it on our calendar as it is. All right, I'll jump back to the, let's see here. Go back to the presentation.
Just a quick reminder to everyone, if you have a question at any point of the presentation, go ahead, raise your hand, and I'll give you the mics. So don't be shy.
All right, so yeah, that basically ends the presentation of the company, and I'll go into the our little question and answer session here. We received some questions by email from you guys. We actually did a presentation earlier today for the European time zone. So we have some questions that we've added here just to keep the ball rolling. And hopefully it will cover some of the questions that you have. But you're, like Danielle said, welcome to raise your hand or ask questions anytime. But I'll just go through the questions that we already received, and hopefully that will spark your interest in asking some more. Let's see here. All right, so First question, what's the latest on the impact of COVID? And yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, most of us, or most of the Western countries, yes, was affected by the COVID, but we live in countries in the first world where there are safety systems in place, and there are certain support systems in place as well from the government and from local private organizations and so on. So I think for most people, they skidded through with um, some struggles, but most people made it through the pandemic in the Western world, while Latin America and some of the other third world countries really got a hard hit by the pandemic. These countries do not have systems in place for serious happenings like the COVID, and it actually means that like when we laid off our staff, it was a very sad moment to be part of that. Most of these people were the main provider of their family, and the economic situation in these countries means that people live together in the same household 2, 3 generations, and there's maybe only 1 or 2 providers in the family. So when you fire somebody, it might affect 5 or 6 people actually that are depending on that salary. So we had a very, very tough time having to let go of our beloved staff. Yeah, this was not only our company, of course. We saw every second shop in Colombia basically was cleared out and came up for rent or for sale. All these little mom and pops businesses went out of business. It meant the whole middle class in the society got wiped out. Once their savings was used and their stock had been sold, they didn't have money to buy new stock, and we were locked down for almost a year with border closures and lockdowns. My daughters had to study home for 1.5 years online. So yeah, it was a tough time for South America and Colombia as well. And this means that many of the things that you're used to just still haven't recovered. And that also goes for our industry. We had to sell our bikes, and so did many other companies. So it means like the tourist and travel boom that is happening right now means that there's a huge pressure on travel companies to deliver the infrastructure and the bikes and so on, but there's just no availability, and nobody have had enough business to start rebuying and rebuilding their businesses yet. So for example, renting bikes is hard. So and with the amount of people that want to travel now, the availability is low, and it means you need to book far in advance if you want to actually secure yourself a spot. We see it on the hotels we travel around. The infrastructure just hasn't been maintained during the pandemic. It means we have had to change hotels in some cases because they had to lay off staff. They didn't have money to maintain, so the facilities are not to the standard that we're used to. And of course, there's still regulations and rules in place that were put in place during the pandemic that are limiting us when we travel around. Border crossings are complicated. There are extra paperwork that you need to have in order and so on. So it's definitely a lasting effect that it's had on South America, the COVID, and we're still seeing the effects of it. All right. Then there's a question about personal safety and the political situation in South America. So I would say the political situation during the COVID, the middle class got wiped out, and it means that either you made really good business during the pandemic and became richer than before, or you fell into the poverty segment of the society. And that means the inequality gap just became much bigger during the last few years. And that has created a whole new political situation in South America, where the majority now is really poor and in many cases hopeless, or just don't see what the future will bring. and that makes them decide to go for whoever is promising the most. And all over South America, the extreme left, socialists and communists, have been promising to change the economic structure, and that means they have promised free school, free healthcare, a lot of nice free things. But as we have seen again and again, Venezuela, Cuba, and so on, if there's nobody there to pay the taxes, then you can't really offer these social programs. So what we've seen now is a lot of international companies leaving South America and pulling out their investments, and it's a sad tendency. And on the other side, communist presidents have been chosen in Colombia, similar sympathetic to communism presidents in Brazil, and so on down through the continent. So there's definitely a very left-wing movement happening in all of South America, trying to take the power, trying to connect themselves with countries like China, which offer an alternative to the US and the Western world. So we're seeing a huge movement in that direction, and I unfortunately don't think that's the right path forward for most of these countries. I believe you need strong businesses to drive the economy, and you need people like our small company to do something extraordinary and hire people and keep the economy going, and hire people and give them salaries, and that's the way that you create wealth for the people. That's a whole different discussion, what's the right political situation, but we can just see that the safety and the security has worsened over the last couple of years in Colombia and down through the continent. The more poor people you have, looking at the super rich, the more crime you start getting, kidnappings, road robberies, and so on. And this is a tendency that has happened all over the continent. I will say, as a visitor, as a tourist, obviously, if you go with a renowned tour company like us or any of our colleagues, we do everything in our power to secure the routes and find the best places to stay, the safe places to visit, and so on. So obviously, when you come hit and run as a tourist, you shouldn't be too concerned about the situation there. But living, raising a family, and running a business in South America right now is a tough proposition for many people, and that's one of the reasons why we chose to move out of Colombia before too many of the crazy policies that have been announced go into effect. So yeah, that's the story right now. Then there's a question about the nitty-gritty of border crossings. I think any place in the world where you give anybody with a low education power to control whether you can enter or not, there will be corruption, and there will be little kings on their position there. And it means that the border crossing sometimes could be a real pain in the ass, take several hours, and they will try and find whatever reason they can to stop you from going across, unless you pay some money under the table or get into to some kind of corruption or payment, unauthorized or unofficial, to get across the border. So yeah, we have had several problems on the borders, but we obviously now have the experience to get all the paperwork in order and all the permissions and so on. But when you're traveling on your own, this is something where you usually have to set off a full day to do a border crossing and be sure that everything is in order to do your border crossing. All right. Choosing between camping and hotel or hostel accommodation. This is obviously a question asked by somebody interested in riding their own bike, I guess, on a tour. I will say, outside the very few campsites that are in South America, I would not recommend doing camping. South America is really, really populated, and again, with the security situation there and the poverty, you're an easy target if you're camping out on a random field or forest somewhere. So I don't really recommend doing the camping scenario down through South America. I, on my own trip back in 2007, packed 50 some kilos or more than 100 pounds of luggage onto the bike. I had camping gear, sleeping bags, air mattresses, cooking gear, the whole lot. And when I finished my trip, I probably had 15 pounds on the bike. I just started throwing stuff out as I went to lighten the weight. And the truth is, you can get a hostel room some places in South America for $5 to $10, and you can park your bike in a secure parking lot and so on. So the risk of camping just really isn't worth it in South America. On top of that, bringing cooking gear, going to a shop, buying the ingredients and cooking on your own, you can't even do that for the price of a lunch in many places. A lunch, you can get a lunch with 3 meals for maybe $3 in many of the countries. So it's very hard to compete on doing your own cooking. So if it's about saving money, then camping and cooking on your own definitely doesn't make sense. But I think hostel is the way to go if you're on a budget. And if you use hotels, then you can usually get all levels of hotels. Obviously, there are some destinations where there's maybe only one option in town. But if you go on a guided tour with us, we do a lot of work, research into finding the best options. We go for unique hotels that give some kind of additional experience and not just the good old chain hotel from Marriott or whatever, even though we also have a couple of nights in those types of hotels. But usually we try to find a family-run boutique hotels in unique locations, and that's something that we pride ourselves with, the accommodation on our tours. So traveling with firearms, I know firearms in the US is a huge deal. We as Europeans, or me as a European, obviously, I'm not quite familiar with the strong sentiments about guns and so on. Since we are very regulated on those types of things, but so are the rules in South America. I mean, you cannot cross borders with a firearm in South America. That would be a hassle of paperwork and permits from another world. I mean, that would be absolutely crazy to think that you could bring a firearm across the borders. So yeah, I would not attempt it. In Colombia, for example, I know if you want to carry a gun, then you have to go through a pretty lengthy course about firearms and do shooting training. Even if you want to buy a bulletproof car, you need a gun license or an arms license, and have to go through the same process as they consider a bulletproof car as a weapon that you can use against the police or the authorities. So all these types of things are really regulated, which of course means that it's really only the criminals that have easy access to guns. And that's just the way it is. There's not much you can do about it. It's impossible to travel with any kind of arms on a South American trip. Renting versus shipping your own bike. This is a good question, and I normally say that if you're planning a trip that's longer than 30 days, then it's worth looking into bringing your own bike or shipping your own bike. When you're renting a bike from any of our colleagues in South America, the day rate usually becomes so high that the breaking point is around 30 days, where it's worth bringing your own bike and shipping it down and shipping it back. On our big expeditions, we try to keep the price so low that it will save you the hassle of doing all the shipping if you choose one of our bikes. But it's right there on the balancing point, so it's something you have to decide for yourself, which is the better option. Yeah, that's what we got. is the Carnet de Passage mandatory for my own motorbike in Latin America? So a Carnet de Passage, I don't know if you know what it is, but it's like a customs guarantee document that your local automobile associations issues, saying that the bike you are riding is registered and taxes has been paid in your home territory. So you need to stamp it out of your home, then stamp it in and out of every single country that you go through on a trip. In Africa, it's absolutely needed to have a Carnet de Passage, but in South America, you do not need it. I was foolish enough on my own trip back in 2007, on the advice of the Automobile Club in Denmark, to make a Carnet de Passage for my bike. But when I ended up in South America, not a single customs officer in the entire continent knew what this document was about. And I had already started signing the bike out from Denmark, so I had to continue to get it stamped in and out every single country, and it was such a hassle to discuss with the customs officers who didn't know what this document was all about. So do not get a Carnet de Passage if you plan to travel on your own bike. What happens now is you go to the customs office on a border crossing, and then they register a temporary import permit. They all have their own system, and they make their own unique temporary import permit. But in every single country, you make a temporary import permit going into the country, and then you cancel it as you go out in the other end of the country. That's the way forward. It's the quickest way, and it's the way they run it. So the Carnet Passage is not worth spending time on. Top destinations in South America. That is one of the hardest questions to answer. I think that's a very individual kind of evaluation. I mean, I obviously love Colombia. I spent 15 years there. We did. We've created, I would say, 36 unique riding days of just stunning and amazing riding in Colombia. So you could loop all those together and do 36 days in Colombia without repeating anything, and it would be one of the best rides you would ever have in your entire life. So I really think the riding in Colombia is spectacular. The accommodation is great. The people are friendly. The food is good. So everything is really great there. But right on its tail, I would say Peru is really up there, about one of the top destinations in the world. And Colombia has a really great cuisine, amazing food. And on top of that, they have some of the biggest highlights in South America along the route. So I know that's not about the riding, but that's about actually having stuff to do in between your rides. So there's the Machu Picchu, the Lake Titicaca, there's the Colca Canyon, the Huacachina, the Nazca line. So Peru has a lot of major touristic sites to visit, and they can all be connected with some of the best roads, I would say, in the world. So Peru is definitely up there as well. Those would be my two top destinations in South America, no doubt about it.
Mike, I have two questions that maybe you can address.
Yeah.
Now that there are thousands of people hiking the Darien Gap, how can we get a motorcycle through or around it? And I also have another question from Kevin. Is there a ferry running between Panama and Colombia? So I mixed these two questions because both are related. So if you could address that.
The Darien Gap is a stretch of, on the very first map I showed you of Colombia, it's like the little thin arm that sticks out to the northwest of Colombia and connects Colombia to Panama, connects the South American continent with the Central American continent. It's about a 90 miles gap, or not gap, but piece of land, which is really thick jungle, swamp, and just a very hostile area. It's considered one of the most hostile areas in the world. One, because of the super dangerous insects and animals living there, There are dangerous plants. There are hostile Indian or indigenous groups there that do not like foreigners coming into their forest. There are drug smugglers having routes through there. And the last several years, we have seen, since all the problems in Haiti, we had an influx of Haitians coming down to Colombia, and a lot of Venezuelans coming across the border from Venezuela. And they all have gathered south of the Darien Gap and are being taken by people smugglers across the Darien Gap on small pathways through the jungle, and then they go from one canoe to the other canoe to the other canoe, and it's a nasty area where you cannot bring a bike. If you Google the Darien Gap, you will find several books and stories about expeditions that got stranded in there. Actually, there are several vehicles parked in the jungle in there that got stuck, that they could never get out. There are only few people that actually has done it and done it successfully. What you can do is you can go to the most eastern town in Panama called Colón, and you can get your bike on a sailboat across to Turbo or to Cartagena in Colombia, and there are no ferry going across. You have to do that on an individual basis, going to the port, talking with all the sailboat captains to see who will take you across. So there is no coordinated effort to get vehicles across the Darien Gap. And that is also because if you bring your vehicle from Panama to Colombia on one of those sailboats, it's actually not legal to do it. And you have to find a way to pay the customs officers to make you a temporary import permit and let you do it. So it's a risky business. Many travelers do it, but you need to be aware that you need to have maybe a week or two to get paperwork sorted out and in order. So it's not a viable route to do if you're on any type of time schedule running that trip. What most people do that are on a timed ride and they need to be somewhere at a certain point, they get to the cargo terminal in Panama City and get the bike strapped onto an airline pallet, and within a few hours it can be flown across to Bogota, where you then fly over and pick up your bike and do customs totally legal, and it's a fairly easy process. So that's really the only way to do that. I think that might have answered the questions. So I will jump on to the next question. The possibility of purchasing.
Sorry, Mike, we have a hand from Jeff. Jeff,
okay.
Go ahead and unmute your mic, and go ahead with your question, so we can make this more like a chat.
Hello, Mike. This is Mo with Jeff, and I spoke with you several times regarding the Ghost Highway and all that stuff. I got caught there earlier this year.
Yes.
And I didn't follow your advice, so I ended up in deep trouble. Question regarding insurance. When you cross the border, like in Brazil, there was no damn way I could get insurance. So I spent my whole 30-odd days riding around Brazil without insurance. And
yes.
It wasn't really easy. Now, what's your advice at the crossing to get insurance?
So in Brazil, you're not required to have a third-party liability insurance on your bike, and the same goes for Ecuador, because they have as what you call it, a centralized or a public paid healthcare system. So you're not required to have a third-party liability insurance in those two countries. So you actually do not need to ride around with an insurance in those two countries.
What about Peru?
Peru, you need a third-party liability insurance, same as Colombia. It's called the SOAT, and you buy it right on the border post between Ecuador and Peru. There is a couple of small tables where you can go buy the insurance, and you must buy it right away, because once you start riding into the country, there will be police checkpoints immediately after the border crossing, and they do sometimes stop you to check that you actually got the insurance, and you can get into serious trouble if you ride without it. So it's definitely recommendable. You can usually buy it for 30 days. It's around $10-15, I think, for 30 days of insurance. It's not a damage insurance, so in case there are damages to your bike in an accident or anything like that, you won't get anything for the damages. But in case you injure somebody else on the road, that will cover their medical expenses.
And just a last question there for you, Mike. I posted up there, what's the absolute latest date to traverse between Manaus and Portobello? That's the most highway. What's the latest?
I mean, that's impossible to say very precisely because the rain comes randomly, but I will say the months of August and September, I mean, the couple of times we have done it, that has turned out to be very good months to do it, because it has been dry. Those are areas that if they just get a tiny little bit of rain, as I think you found out last year, they are very, very slippery and complicated to go through. So I would not go much. I wouldn't go far into October before you are in serious risk of starting to get rain. It rains like between 8 and 10 months a year down there.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Mike, I have a couple of questions related to the topic that you were talking about. It's just as regards the insurance for my own motorbike, will you help in getting a good one? And the other question is, in case I travel with you on my own motorbike, what about the maintenance of the motorbike? Those two questions.
Yeah. So obviously, if you're traveling with us, we will of course help get insurance and make sure that we have all the right paperwork in order to do border crossings and to drive legally in every country that we go through. Even if you're on your own bike, we'll make sure that all that gets sorted out. So yeah, that's something. That's one of the reasons why you would go with somebody like us to have us help with all that stuff. Concerning the maintenance, if you're on your own bike, so we normally have a mechanic on our bigger expeditions in the vehicle, and obviously planning to have that again. Plus, I and the assistant guide are pretty mechanically experienced to fix stuff on the road. Obviously, we cannot do full-on repair, motor repairs or gearbox repairs and stuff like that, but we can usually do preventive maintenance, which is oil and filter changes, adjustment of chains, tire changes, and stuff like that. And we are, of course, available on the entire trip to help out with that. The actual consumables, if you're riding your own bike, is on your own account, but we will help source the tires, the stuff you need, and we, of course, also bring a bunch of stuff on our truck. The problem is, crossing borders, we cannot bring many sets of tires, because then the customs officers will ask us to pay import taxes on tires we already bought and paid import taxes off somewhere else. So there's several tricks and things that you need to be aware of, but we have a very good network all through the continent of people that help us out, of colleagues and so on. So we can usually source anything we need, and with a little bit of planning ahead, we will check that this chain is about to go, this tire is about to go. We can go another 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles, and within that time, we need to find this and that, and we will source it and sort that out. So if you're riding your own bike, obviously, first of all, you must be sure that it's in such a good condition that it can handle 15,000 kilometers or 9,000 miles, more or less. Obviously, these are mechanical machines, so there are no guarantees, but we have had people bring their own bikes before that was simply not in a condition to do the entire trip. And we had one bike that seized its engine on a trip halfway, and we had to trailer the bike for 7 days before we could find a mechanic on a rest day that would work overtime and through the night and get this bike back up and running. But I mean, it's sad to lose a week of riding on a big tour because you came on an old bike that was not really prepared for it. So that type of stuff, like bigger mechanical issues, we cannot do on the side of the road or at night at the hotel. But anything that has to do with maintenance and changing consumable parts, definitely that's all something that we take care of during the tour.
Okay, I guess that answers those questions, Mike.
All right. So then I'll jump on to the next question here, the possibility of purchasing a local motorcycle for your journey. So yes, again, it goes back a little bit to the renting versus bringing your own bike. Of course, there is an option of buying a bike, and Colombia is a very good starting point. Whether you're obviously going on a tour with us or just exploring on your own, you can buy a bike in Colombia. You can have it registered to your name. You do not have to be a resident in the country. All you need is your passport and your fingerprint. And you have to go to a central register in Colombia and register your passport and your fingerprint. And then within 24 hours, you'll be allowed to buy a vehicle in Colombia. So this is a very good solution. You don't have to be resident, anything like that. So it's a good thing. But there's also a downside to that, which is in every single country in Latin America, you are not allowed to import a used vehicle for resale. So you can only import a used vehicle for the purposes of doing a touristic visit and taking it out again within the designated time, which is usually maximum 90 days. And that means if you purchase a bike in Colombia, it must return to Colombia to be sold again. So if you, for example, buy a bike in Colombia and do the top to bottom tour with us, the 60 days, then we can ship it back to Colombia and we can have all the paperwork filled out and we can help you with the sale. We still are part owners of a Honda dealership in Cali, so we can help sell used vehicles there. And then once the sale goes through, we'll obviously transfer your money back to you. There is a second issue about purchasing a bike. Most countries in South America have very high import taxes. So if a bike in the US costs $10,000, you should expect it to cost double, $20,000 in a country like Colombia. That means you have to put down a big amount of money. But the good thing is, since it's illegal to import used vehicles, once you come back to Colombia and you actually try to resell the bike, you can get almost the same value for it as you purchased it for. And then I can see Eric is raising his hand here.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric. And then I have a question from Jeff.
Yeah, my questions are related to this. I'm planning, my brother and I were actually supposed to do a Colombia to South America or to Ushuaia tour that got canceled. So we are going to basically ride to Latin America starting the new year. And I don't know how far we're going to end up. I'm hoping to get to Colombia. And the question I really had is I wanted to, keep my bike in South America. And the idea is I'll keep it there and kind of maybe come back and do like 2 to 4 week trips for the rest of the year 24. And was even hoping to join you on the Trans-Amazonian in 25 if you're doing that. So, wanted to keep a bike around there, just really explore Latin America. I like my bike. So I mean, what would you suggest? Could I import it and pay the tax? I mean, I'm not too cost sensitive on that, but what would you recommend? What's the best way? Is there some countries that are better to store it than others? I've heard I can store it in Argentina for up to 6 months. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there are some issues with that. One is that in, I think, almost all countries, perhaps Argentina, I'm not 100% familiar with that, but around most of the countries, you get a 90-day temporary import, and that's it. Then the vehicle must leave the country, or if you're still touring in that country, by the end of the 90 days, you can extend your own visa, your own stay with another 90 days. And then once you have that, then you can go through a really painful, annoying hassle of a process to get the extension on your vehicle as well. So you can stay up to 6 months. I would suspect it's the same in Argentina, but I don't know 100%. But it basically means that if you plan to do this strategy, you must plan your trip with 90 days intervals. So it means from the second you enter the new country, you have 90 days to ride whatever part of the country you want to do, go back home and come back before the 90 days run out and take it out of the country where it's stored at. That's really the only legal way to do it. But obviously we're talking Latin America, and there's always a solution in Latin America. It's called dollar bills. And so in most places you can actually, like in Colombia, you can store the bike, you drive to the border, you forget to do the customs when you leave the country, and you just check the bike into Ecuador like you were perfectly on time with your bike, and they won't be able to check whether or not it's overstayed in Colombia, and you just get your 90 days on Ecuador and you keep riding. So that's one way to do it. But from where you're storing the bike till you reach the border, there is the risk of you being stopped by a police check and them actually going into the paperwork and seeing that the bike has overstayed, which would give them the right to confiscate the bike. But that's where I'm saying in most of those types of cases where you get some tiny police officer checkpoint, that's where the dollar bills come into the game, and you can usually pay your way out of them to look the other way while you ride to the border and check your bike out. This can probably be done in most of the countries, but obviously it's not the ideal scenario because you are taking a risk of doing it like that. If you want to do some, I mean, even if you bought a bike in Colombia and wanted to store it around in Latin America, it would be exactly the same. Once you're out of Colombia, the bike is a foreign bike, so you would get 90 days in Ecuador, you would get 90 days in Peru, so you have exactly the same problem. So it's not really a viable situation unless you can keep it within like 3 month blocks.
But so to follow up, if I registered it in Colombia, though, if I had a bike registered in Colombia, as long as I just brought it back to Colombia, I could keep it. Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you bring it back every time you bring, but it would have to be your. Sorry,
go ahead. I was going to say, what would be the tax? Let's just say I have a used bike worth $15,000 or so in the U.S. 15, 20,000.
With that, there are no solutions. You cannot legally import a used vehicle into Colombia or any of the other countries. So you would have to buy a used or a new bike in Colombia and go from there. You would not be able to register a used bike. Trust me, I tried it for 15 years to find ways to get US registered bikes into Colombia and re-register them because of the high taxes. But the car industry lobbyists has this down, and they're not letting any of the regulations and laws change on this, because this means that they have the monopoly of bringing in vehicles to the country. So I don't think that will change anytime soon, and it means that you have to buy a new vehicle or you have to go on the used market of the vehicles that are already there. That would be the only option. All right.
Okay,
then
I had a question from Jeff. It was about the cost to ship the bike from Bogota to Panama by plane.
Last I checked, it was around $1,000, little under $1,000. And what you do is you go to the airport and to the cargo terminal. You have to do your customs process, and usually you also have to do national police that check for drugs with sniffer dogs and all of that. And they will strap it onto an airline pallet, so you don't have to build a crate. They will strap it onto an airline pallet, and that rolls straight into the plane and straight out in Bogota. Usually you have to take out all the fuel. Some cases they ask about taking oil and air out of the tires, which is silly, and you can usually discuss that and get around that. So you only have to just leave a tiny little bit of fuel so you can actually drive out of the airport. So that's the way to do it, and it's usually around $1,000. The price changes with the fluctuation of the exchange rate on the dollar and so on. and sometimes there are fuel surplus and so, but that's more or less the price.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right,
Go
so
ahead.
the question on the screen, that's the one we just had. Let's see what the next is. Okay, so I kind of answered this a little bit earlier, but yeah, I have 2 teenage daughters of my own and an adopted girl as well. And basically, after the COVID pandemic, the security situation and the opportunities in Colombia has kind of meant that we decided that it was best to leave. The girls are at the age now where they want to have some independence and go explore the world on their own, and that's just simply something that that is not possible in Colombia. We lived with a armed guard in our building. There's armed guard in the school. You know, you have to watch over your shoulder anytime you move around town. If you have a car that looks more than average, so it's a situation that, in the long run, especially raising a family, is something that's not ideal. And for those reasons, we decided to move to Europe now, after the communist president was chosen last year, and he's coming up with all these pretty scary policies of nationalizing companies and confiscating private property, and I don't know what. So it sounds very much like the words of Maduro and Chavez in Venezuela, when Chavez destroyed that country 20-some years ago. So I'm very, very worried for Colombia and the future in Colombia. I'm hoping and I'm crossing my fingers that the Colombian people will come to their senses and get someone else chosen for their president in the next term, and get the country back on a more capitalist track, which I think will attract more foreign investment again, and foreigners in general. So we'll see, but I think if I have to be completely honest, I think South America is in for a very bumpy road for the next decade, and it's not something that will be able to be cleaned up by one or the other president. We're talking 10 years of recovery from the COVID before we will be back just to the level we were before the pandemic, and that is only if we have the right people in place. Otherwise, it can go really, really wrong. So we're still, of course, involved very much in South America. My wife has all her family, extended family down there. We are still part owners of a Honda dealership in Cali. We still run tours all over the continent, and I'm just hopeful that the continent will get out of the crisis quickly. But in the meantime, we're gonna bet on Europe for a while and let our girls finish their education over here and get some connection to my roots. So that's the reason. Let's see what else we got. Okay, I think that was the question you just asked. Okay, so what's included in a MotoDreamer tour? Yeah, it varies a little bit depending on the type of tour that you're signing up for. Our shorter tours are usually either all-inclusive or they exclude just a few items. Obviously, flights are usually excluded on all the tours because people come from all around, so it's impossible to do a price on that. We do have an in-house travel agent that is very helpful and will help book the best connections to whatever destination we are traveling in. So that's an option we can help with, but it's not included on the tour. And then on some of the trips, we exclude lunches and dinners just because there are so many dietary concerns to worry about now. People don't eat gluten, they don't eat seafood, they don't this, they don't that. So if we're supposed to include lunches and dinners on the trips, then we would have to go by the highest point on the menu, and that would just make it unreasonable priced. And for that reason, we let people choose eat what they want to eat. Some people choose a soup for lunch and that's it, and other people want lobster, and you're totally free to do that with this scenario. Everything else is basically included. We include obviously the accommodation with breakfast, fuel, insurances, the guide, the support truck, the group activities, any kind of transport along the route if we have a shipping across a river, toll roads, all of that is included. So it really is your flights and then lunches and dinners on some trips. On the big expeditions, we do allow people to bring their own bike. So then there are some other rules that I'm happy to go into if you want to get the details. But if you go into our website, you can also see exactly what's included and what's not on the tours. So yeah, I think that's the end of the questions that I had predetermined here. But if you have any more questions, please raise your hand. I can see Jeff just raised his hand, so go ahead.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, Mike, it's Mo with Jeff.
Yeah.
Going up from Portobello up to Cusco, what riding gear should we have? Like, how cold does it get up in Cusco heading back to Colombia?
You will get up to almost 5,000 meters altitude going from Porto Maldonado at the bottom of the Andes Mountains, and then up over the pass towards Cusco. And it's usually snowy and close to freezing point up there. But you are up and down in a matter of an hour or two. So I think, I mean, I ride in a fully ventilated suit on all our trips in South America, and then I have a long sleeve warm shirt to put underneath my my mesh jacket, and then I have a rain Gore-Tex shell that I put on top in case it gets cold on the top, and that usually keeps me warm on the passes. For 80% of the time you're in warm weather riding, including there. I mean, Cusco is at around 3,500 meters altitude. That would be 10,000 feet, I guess, 11,000 feet. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, something like that. It's cool in the evening. Usually during the day, the sun is out. It's nice. You can wear a t-shirt and long pants. So Cusco is not that cold. But you will have that 5,000 meter, 16,000 feet pass coming across from Cusco, or coming across from the Amazon to the Cusco side of the mountain. But I'll say layer up. You don't have to bring a specific suit for that short ride.
Yeah, so that would be between November, December. So prepare for
yeah. So that's the thing about basically from Peru all the way up to Colombia. You're so close to the equator that the temperature and the season doesn't change. It depends on the altitude of the mountains and not on the season in the year. So yeah, it's basically the same all year round. You have 12 hours of sunlight. You have the same temperature at the valleys, the same temperature on the mountaintop. They say from every 200 meters, so around 600 feet, it drops 1 degree Celsius. So I'm speaking a little European metric system here. I hope you understand that. But I mean, the higher you get up, the colder it gets. And once you get back down again, it warms up, and it's all year round the same.
What about fuel stops, Mike?
From Portobello?
Along the way, like in some parts in Brazil, I had to buy off the pump bottles.
Yes.
You know, dirt.
I mean, from Portobello through Porto Maldonado up to Cusco, there's plenty of fuel stops. If I remember right, it's actually all paved from there all the way to Cusco.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mike.
No problem. Anybody? I see you.
We also have a hand from Alet and from Kitty, Carrie. So go ahead, Alet. Unmute your microphone. Okay, so then we move to Kiri. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Howdy, Mike. I was wondering if you were to buy a bike in South America, which one has the greatest availability in parts? You know, is it the ones built there, or is it the import? You know, I assume it's the ones that are built like in Brazil, like what we rode when we did the Cali, Medellin, and back. Those sort of bikes.
So I mean, the Japanese bikes are probably the bikes that are the best represented in South America in general. But specific countries have specific models available, so it's not always easy to find parts for certain models of bikes, even though the brand has representation there. So, I mean, it's hard to. There is no bike that is the overall winner, that is just great represented and you can get everything everywhere. It is very much a question of sourcing the stuff that you need, and very worst case it's about DHLing parts in from the US, which can be done usually within three to 4 working days. So I will say, since these countries are so used to recycling stuff and rebuilding, I mean, so many things is possible to get fixed or manufactured locally. Obviously not technical engine parts, but I mean, with newer bikes, it's very rare that we see something serious happen on the gearbox or the engine. Sorry?
Oh no, that was Stuart up from the tour.
Okay.
We're in the Philippines here, and so we're just waking up.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So yeah, so I think if you want to buy a bike down there, I would definitely go Japanese for the best amount of workshops available, but it doesn't mean that they have all the parts available.
Got it. Thank you very much.
All right.
Hi, it's Elite here.
Hello.
I'm talking to you from New Zealand.
Okay.
We are booked to do that tour from January 25 with you,
Okay.
the top to bottom. We've got bikes in LA, and we would like to bring them down to Colombia. Is there anyone else that's interested in doing that ride? Because we can do that before then.
Or to ride down to Panama City, or what are you thinking?
Right, Panama City, and then bring the bikes across to Colombia.
I mean, I don't know how many of the people here have signed up for the 2025 tour, but it's definitely something that I would be able to send out to the people and ask how many of them would be interested in that, and you might be able to get a small group together for doing that part of the tour. The other option, of course, is that we could figure out a shared shipping from LA down to Colombia if you want to skip the central part of America, which is a lot of border crossings. So a lot of pain in the ass paperwork, but of course, if you haven't been on those parts of the world, it's interesting. I will say, objectively, South America is much more interesting than Central America, but that's just my personal opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other raised hands or questions there?
Kerry Bivan, his hand is up again, but not sure if he has any question.
Actually, that's by accident. You can nix that. Sorry.
Okay. Then go ahead, Mike. We don't have any more hands raised.
All right. Well, I think there is a raised hand again. Jeff?
Yeah, just a last question for you, Mike. And you did talk to me about this. Venezuela is still closed.
No, Venezuela is open now. From the Colombian side, I'm unsure about the border between Brazil and Venezuela. If it's not open yet, I think it's possible to get a permit to cross it. But the Colombian-Venezuelan border is now open, and you can move freely across with your vehicle.
Now, would you suggest that, because it saves me a lot of time going all the way down to Portobello if I get to Boa Vista and turn north to El Tigre?
Yeah. So from Manaus, you're saying, or?
So from Boa Vista, because I'll be crossing in from
Yeah.
Desert. So
Yeah, I mean, going across Venezuela it can be done in about a week ride from Boa Vista to Colombia. So that's obviously a lot faster than going south around the Amazon basin. But obviously the security situation in Venezuela is somewhat risky. It's very, very poor. It's known for road robberies and so on. So if you don't travel in a convoy or a group, it could be a little bit tricky. But that's a risk assessment you have to make on your own. I do have some contacts in Venezuela, and I could probably do a little bit of research to find out if the Brazil-Venezuela border is open. But again, these things are something that change from one day to the other. So it could be that it's open for this month, and then next month they close it again for whatever political reason. Or so it's a little risky. We've been caught out twice where we were supposed to go through Venezuela, where we had to reroute because they just closed the border with no warning. And yeah, so that's something you have to have a plan B in place if you plan to do that.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike. Regards.
You're welcome. Eric?
Yeah, I have a question on, some of your longer, or maybe even some of your shorter ones is relevant. If you want to travel with a non-rider, but you don't necessarily want, pillion on the back of your bike, is there a chase vehicle or any other way that maybe somebody could join you?
Yeah, so all our tours, we bring a chase vehicle, and pillion riders can shift between riding with the one they're traveling with on the bike, or they can sit in the support van. My wife have joined quite a few of our trips and switched back and forth. She gets bored on the back of the bike after a while and goes in the truck. She feels cold, she goes in the truck. If it rains, it's nice to be in the van instead of on the bike. So yeah, that's an option. Obviously, we have priority in case of accidents or incidents that happen along the way for riders that are needing to have a space in the support vehicle. But most of the time we have a crew cab pickup with 3 or 4 spaces, so we can usually make it happen if the pillions want to switch between the bike and the van. I don't know if that answered everything. If there are no more questions, then I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Sunday afternoon. It's 1:30 in the morning over here where I'm at, so it's also bedtime soon for me. And I just wanted to send you off with this message of letting the adventure begin. This has been our hook line for 15 years of running tours in South America, and I hope you enjoyed the event. And anytime you have any questions, in the signature of the emails you have been receiving about this event, you have my direct WhatsApp number and my phone number. So anytime you have a question, concern, anything, you just contact me directly and I will answer as quickly as possible. And I hope to see you guys on tour, either in South America or somewhere else in the world. And have a great rest of the afternoon, evening, where you're at. Thanks so much for joining.